Here's the thing. I'm just going to say it bluntly. Social spaces aren't just games. Like, from the get-go. There are a few of you with whom I remember sitting and having discussions. You're here in the room. It's so good to see you. Literally now, gosh, almost 20 years ago, having arguments about whether or not we were even making games when we were making the early virtual worlds and the MMOs. You know, when I was making Ultima Online, I would have arguments with people like Eric Zimmerman about this. I told him bluntly, I'm not sure that's what I do. I'm not sure I make games. I think I design places and worlds and societies and not just games. They just happen to have a lot of games in them, things that you can stumble across and play. But really, the huge amount of the work was going into simulating things like tailoring and rabbit hunting and running a shop, right? Not necessarily what we think of as games. So I used to say I was making worlds, right? Virtual worlds. And I really do believe that when you start working in the arena of online social spaces, that's what you're doing. Even though those days are long gone and, you know, MMOs are not the new hotness anymore, right? They have not been in quite a while. But if you are making a social VR space, a social AR space, as a lot of people are trying to do, you aren't just making a game, you're designing a society. When you choose to take up those tools, connectivity, persistence, identity, you are going to design that society either on purpose or by accident. And sorry to say, I'm seeing a lot of people doing it by accident. So I'm here to try to persuade you to do it on purpose. Because if you host an online community where people can cause harm to another person, you are on the hook. And if you can't afford to be on the hook, don't host an online community. I wish there were a different answer. I don't think there is. Now, you're the government of that space. You're hosting real people. You should want to be doing this. And I understand the idea that you may not quite know how. That's fine. Let's talk about ways you can do it. The first thing people need to understand is that you actually need to build all of your moderation structure, all of this, on a due process. You actually need to institute a rule of law. That means starting from the very beginning, actually having such a code of law, a code of conduct. You need some kind of code of conduct, end user license agreement, terms of service, written in plain English that every player affirmatively signs up to the first time they log in and they swear an oath, I will abide by this. And it needs to be posted everywhere, and you need to be reinforcing this as a cultural thing every day, right? This is kind of what we do in the real world, and we're not even entirely satisfied with how well it works here, right? But you don't get to abdicate doing it. It has enormous benefits, just not only as a cultural thing, but also for clearing up edge cases, because you're going to be fighting an awful lot of edge cases. The most concrete, practical thing is a tool that has been in use for, oh gosh, I went asking, and the earliest virtual world I could find it that was doing it were games on America Online and Genie. Okay, for anybody who here doesn't know what those are because they're too old, right? And that's a concept called the circular buffer. And this is a very simple thing that if you weren't using voice chat, you could all go and implement right now. Unfortunately, you're using voice chat, so you're screwed. But simply recording, keeping track of the last minute to 5 minutes of every single interaction each client sees and storing it, discarding the stuff that's 5 minutes old and always entering the most recent stuff so that when something like this happens and no admin is online, when they hit the report button, it is attached as impartial evidence that can be adjudicated. The Quiver story, how do you pronounce that anyway? Quiver? Anyway, that story, I absolutely believe the woman, okay? I absolutely believe that story happened. There's corroboration and all the rest. At the same time, believe me, you will have cases where it will turn into one says, the other says. If you don't have tools like this, You are literally going to spend your entire monthly profit on the first call, standing there mediating between two people who are yelling at one another. It is actually cheaper to ban every single user who calls for help. I know, this sounds horrendous. Banning every person who calls for help is cheaper than helping them, right? Because they cost so much money to support. So you need to have incontrovertible evidence. I have no idea how small shops are going to do this with voice logs. Worse, I think you need to do more than just voice logs. I think you need to record every single gesture so that when somebody does this, the CS person can replay it back and verify who started the fight. It's not going to be cheap, but you need to do it. You also need to be aware, and this is also just a home truth, the people who use virtual spaces are very often using them for therapeutic purposes. That means a higher incidence of individuals inside your space who are dealing with psychological stress of various sorts. It's just how the numbers work out. You just need to be aware of it. There is not a single large-scale commercial virtual world that does not have the FBI and suicide hotlines on speed dial. The number of runaways that we tracked down for the FBI and the police while at Sony Online was easily in the triple digits, right? And I would add to this, by the way, be prepared to deal with manifestations of mental illness. Those folks will frequently be calling for assistance within this virtual setting. And you have gone and built their home away from home, the place that they use to cope, the place that they are using in order to, as their support system. Often the friends that they've made in your space are the ones that literally keep them alive. You are holding their lives in your hands. So you have to take it seriously. You shape this society in really fundamental ways. Have I scared the shit out of you yet? I hope so, right? I hope so. Don't worry, it won't all be a downer, I promise. But the flip side of this power is that you can shape this environment in ways that are amazing. Probably the biggest bias that is present in social VR is around empathy, frankly. The challenge here is, there's multiple challenges, but as people enter a space, if they don't have a stake in the space, if they don't have persistent identity in it already, it's very easy to behave as a virtual sociopath. They don't have any community ties whatsoever. So you have to start creating investment into an identity really early on. So those of you who are making systems that are drop-in, don't. You have to start doing persistent identity, because if you can abandon an identity, that's basically a license to do whatever you want and not get stopped. You can't use things like credit cards to block, for example. Average US household, I think, has 13 credit card numbers. That's an awful lot of shots at harassing somebody, right, without getting caught. So the real way you have to do it is by causing personal investment in the identity they are creating so that they don't want to lose it. They don't want to lose the investment they've made. But the other big thing that you need to do is increase channels for conveying emotional content between the avatars, between the players. And again, this is a place where voice kind of cuts both ways, right? I mean, there are two classic ways of doing this. Very simple. One is gameplay that involves teamwork. The other one is an emote system. Simply put, an emote system. Best practice emote systems involve automatically parsing text chat and pulling out the emotional cues that people are already sticking in there, like smileys. You know this because Facebook Messenger does it, chat does it, Twitter does, everything does this now, right? That's best practice. Giving people manual puppeteering structures like, oh, I have to hit this combination of buttons to smile, results in people not smiling, I'm afraid, right? Yes, there's a subset of people who are good at puppeteering, most people are not. Having the system puppeteer for them off of cues has been shown to be dramatically more effective. Dramatically more effective. I don't know how you're going to do this with voice. Maybe it can be a really cool research project for somebody to start developing technology to do natural language processing and analysis of voice stressors, but I'm not expecting it anytime soon. So good luck, those of you working in that field, because while voice does convey a significant amount of emotional content, particularly once you get into fictional social VR spaces of any sort, you can't expect people to be trained actors in knowing how to convey emotion, right? It's going to be challenging. And if what they need to do is convey real emotion, they will prefer to use Skype, where they get all the cues, rather than settling for an inferior system.